Great Spirit, long ago I had a vision. Our fields were green, our rivers pure, and our food plentiful. But darkness came and covered the world.
"30,000 years ago, humans first trekked across the Bering Strait land bridge that had formed during the Great Ice Age. By 15,000 years later, they had reached North America, hunting big game and continuing their migration across the continent. They would soon create civilizations that would remain unknown to the rest of the world for thousands of years to come. However, these great civilizations built long ago would soon be discovered by European nations looking for routes to the great markets of Asia. The year was 1492 when Christopher Columbus first stumbled upon the New World. Sent by Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand II to find a new route to India, Columbus, however, made contact with the Taino. This eventually led to more European expeditions to the New World. One such expedition included Hernan Cortés, who had made contact with the Aztecs. This would initiate a century-long genocide of a once proud people and cause them to be under the control of the Spanish. This occurred in the forms of disease and Spanish missions. Spanish missions were built all over the New World and were intended to teach Native Americans the Catholic faith and assimilate them into Spanish society. Taught by friars and Franciscans, the native population slowly began to convert, but not without resistance, such as Pope's Rebellion. The natives were also taught many new skills such as carpentry and blacksmithing. Now, on the east coast of the North American continent came another newcomer, the English. The first to come was the Jamestown colony of the Virginia Company. In the beginning, the colonists of Jamestown and the natives in the area had an amicable relationship established by John Smith, leader of Jamestown, and Powhatan, leader of the Powhatan Confederacy. This sort of relationship also extended into other English settlements such as the Pilgrims of Plymouth Colony and the Wampanoags, in which the two had the first Thanksgiving. However, relations began to deteriorate as European disease had begun to take its toll on the native population and as the English colonists began to encroach on native land.
In 1622, native warriors attacked and sacked the Jamestown settlement. Such conflicts also erupted in the New England colonies between the Puritans and Pequot. This period of conflict, known as the Pequot War, saw the brutal slaughter of men, women, and children in the massacre at Mystic River in 1637. These skirmishes, though small in scale, would foreshadow an even darker future of death and destruction. Conflict exploded again as the New England area tribes united in a coalition led by Metacomet, or King Philip. King Philip's war ended with a Puritan victory in 1676 that helped form a unique American identity among the colonists and emboldened them to press further west. When the 7 Years' War reached North America in the 1750s, different native tribes capitalized on this opportunity to try and stop the white tide westward. The Iroquois Confederacy and its allies gave their support to the French, while other tribes fought for the British, such as the Mohicans. This division among the tribes demonstrated that the effort to push back settlers was not fully united. And these efforts proved unfruitful even after the conclusion of the French and Indian War, as British colonists, buoyed by the victory, began to settle west of the Appalachians. Yet even with the proclamation of 1763, which closed these western lands to settlers, more and more began to encroach on native land. Tensions erupted again during the American Revolution. As before during the French and Indian War, different tribes fought for the preservation of their own interests. Some, like Joseph Brant of the Mohawk, sided with the British in the hope that the conditions of the proclamation of 1763 would be upheld. But with U.S. independence achieved at the end of the rebellion, a trickle of settlers quickly became a growing torrent. Warfare broke out in the Northwest Territories between the Shawnee and settlers, and under the Treaty of Greenville, which ended the Northwest Indian War of 1794, much of the Ohio Territory was lost to settlers. When the British came back during the War of 1812, some Native Americans rushed to complete the final attempt that would halt the advance of the U.S. settlers. Shawnee leader Tecumseh envisioned a continental-wide confederacy of native tribes that would unite to push back the U.S. With the help of his brother Tenskwatawa, a religious leader and prophet, and the British, Tecumseh fought the U.S., His cause suffered defeat at the Battle of Tippecanoe, and he was eventually killed in the Battle of the Thames. Thus, the envision for a Pan-American alliance of tribes to resist white encroachment was extinguished. Some Native Americans attempted to avoid persecution by trying to assimilate or adopt certain aspects of white culture in the Americas. Most notably, the Cherokee Nation adopted a high degree of white culture. They took up farming in the manner of the Europeans, built plantations, and some even owned slaves. A leading intellectual named Sequoyah developed a writing system for the Cherokee language. The Cherokees even wrote their own constitution and had their own Congress or governing body, and were recognized by the United States as a separate and independent nation. This view, however, changed with the election of Andrew Jackson as president in 1829. When Andrew Jackson came into office, he enacted a policy to try and remove the Cherokees and other southeastern tribes from their ancestral homelands. Thus, the Indian Removal Act was passed in 1830. This legislation forced the Native American tribes and peoples of the southeastern United States to relocate out west in the Oklahoma territories. Thousands of people were force-marched for miles to Oklahoma in what became known as the Trail of Tears, where hundreds died from exposure, exhaustion, and lack of food. Some groups tried to resist relocation to Oklahoma. Most notably, Osceola, a leader among the Seminoles in Florida, led bands that attacked and fought with U.S. soldiers during the Second Seminole War in the 1830s. However, fighting forced some Seminoles to march to Oklahoma. The rest remained hidden in the Everglades. After the Indian Removal Act, thousands of settlers expanded into the southeast. And after settling that land, many looked even farther westward. Following the U.S. victory over Mexico in the Mexican-American War during the 1840s, huge amounts of western land from the Mexican cession were opened under the control of the United States. Thousands of settlers poured out west in this era of manifest destiny. During this push westward, conflicts increased between settlers and Plains Indians. In the late 1860s, after some Native Americans from the Southeast had participated in the Civil War on both sides, the Plains Indians began to demonstrate stronger resistance towards U.S. expansionism. For example, Sioux Chief Red Cloud defeated the United States Army in the Red Clouds War in 1866 to 1868. Chief Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse ambushed Custer's 7th Cavalry at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Though suffering major defeats, the United States eventually gained the upper hand and captured major resistance leaders and exacted treaties that ceded huge swaths of native land to settlers.
After years of resistance, Native Americans were corralled by the U.S. government onto allotments of land, formally establishing the reservation system under the Dawes Act of 1887. During this time of hardship, some found solace in a period of religious revival. Banned in the late 1800s, the sun dance and ghost dance were part of this religious fervor to counter the growing influence of the white man. Tensions flared in 1890 that led to the massacre at Wounded Knee, when U.S. troops killed over 150 Lakota Sioux who were participating in a ghost dance. Throughout this time, some Native Americans fought in the interests of the invaders. The Indian Scouts, a branch of the U.S. Army made up of Native allies, participated heavily in the Plains Wars of the late 1800s. During the First World War, over 12,000 American Indians from various tribes served in the United States military. As a result of the Snyder Act of 1924, Native Americans were given citizenship, which made them eligible for the draft in World War II. Over 40,000 Native Americans fought in World War II, many as code talkers, due to the fact that Navajo, along with other native languages, could not be deciphered by foreign enemies. Thus, Native Americans served with distinction. Yet when they returned home, they still found a discriminating nation. Spurred by the African American civil rights movement and other minorities during the 1960s, Native Americans began to increase their voice in government and in public. They protested government treatment and the breaking of several early treaties by occupying the prison of Alcatraz in 1969. Led by two dynamic leaders, Russell Means and Dennis Banks, the American Indian movement also rose in this period and occupied the site of Wounded Knee in South Dakota in 1973 that resulted in a violent confrontation with government forces. This movement revealed a surge in pride among Native peoples as they formed an identity in a rapidly growing modern world. Today, many continue to preserve the ancient traditions of their ancestors as they cherish a rich history and culture.